Hi again, listeners, and welcome to the latest Footnote episode of the Fantasy Animation Podcast with me, a franchised Chris Holliday.
And me, a multi-platformed Alex Sargent.
There we go. I didn't tell you I was going to do that, so well done.
Thanks.
We are, and in fact, that functions as a nice little callback to another episode that we've done in these Footnote formats on the notion of transmedia and Henry Jenkins and others' work on transmedia storytelling. And this kind of comes out. We teased a little bit in true multimedia or true transmedia fashion. We teased an episode on franchises. So here we are talking about film franchises, and I guess the franchise era, we could say, the contemporary economy of or media ecology, let's say, of Hollywood. Lots and lots of people have written on cycles, remakes, film series, under perhaps a broader umbrella of the franchise. So exciting, and of course, franchises has a lot in conversation with fantasy, and I know Alex is ready to kick things off with a discussion of Lord of the Rings. But I will set the timer, so we have 10 minutes. Franchises, what are they, Alex Sargent?
So I think this one's a history lesson. I think this is about the way the people have used the term franchises all the time, and usually very meaningfully and pretty accurately. So the only thing to kind of add to it is to think about franchises as a shift in the way in which, or a continual shift in the way in which film production, particularly in the United States, is organized, and the kind of films you then get as a result of that organization. So when we talk about franchises, we are usually at least if we're talking about historians' definitions of it, we are usually talking at a post 2000 era of film production, which marks a kind of, if not a full stop from previous eras, certainly a shift into a kind of more intensified version of what came before. So the story probably starts mid to late 70s with the boom of the blockbuster. And why the story starts there is because something very interesting happens when Hollywood basically collapses in the late 60s. For people who don't know, there's this kind of absolute financial collapse. The studios are essentially bankrupt, and they are bankrupted because the studios have been trying since the early 50s to compete with television and compete with all these different entertainment platforms. And by the end of the 60s, they have failed miserably. So they're bankrupted, and they are bought by a new generation of studio execs who are not film producers. They don't identify as film producers. They are multimedia conglomerates. They are interested in buying different multimedia assets to allow one to speak to the other. Okay, they're record producers, they're television producers, they're Las Vegas hotel owners, they're people interested in entertaining, making a lot of money out of entertaining the public across lots of different platforms. And what that means is that Hollywood starts to become part of a broader system in which it isn't a production line that makes films anymore. It's part of a broader system which tries to get your attention through the entertainment industry. Should I pause there for a sec, Chris, so that we don't go through the whole...
No, I'm just thinking about kind of if we're trying to locate the franchise.
Yeah.
I'm thinking. Well, I'm always thinking about James Bond, of course, but
yes.
I'm also thinking about many scholars, and there are people writing on the notion of the franchise that have taken a more, as you say, historical approach and looked at the classical Hollywood era to talk about. I guess sequels, the role of sequels within the classical Hollywood system. So sequels did exist.
Yeah, and serials did exist. Like serials were really big in the Hollywood era. There were early serials of Superman, Batman, things like that. Lots of detective mysteries.
I remember as an undergraduate student in a silent cinema course, learning about the perils of Pauline.
Right.
So all of these sorts of series,
the Bowery Boys, these kind of these kind of detective. So what is a franchise? It's not just a sequel. It's not just a run of films that happen to have a recurring set of characters or narratives. Because Hollywood's been doing that. Well, films have been doing that since the dawn of film. So it's not just that. It's a new way of economically organizing your entire industry. So sequels are an attempt to make more money out of a previous product. Fine. A franchise is a way of responding to what happens after the 1970s, which is that from this factory line system of production, and this is slowly happening throughout the decade, but it really kind of dramatically changes around the sort of mid-70s. This factory line system of production of, okay, we'll make this film, then we'll make this film, we'll get John Ford to go make this Western and then this Western, and we'll get Michael Curtiz to make Casablanca and then make this screwball comedy, and Howard Hawks can go over here and over there. That gets replaced by an individual film-by-film system of labor, which means that labor becomes far more precarious, and risk is spread by film by film by film. People sign film by film contracts. Stars don't sign contracts with studios anymore. They sign contracts to star in a film, or maybe 2 or 3 films if you're lucky, but usually a film. So that creates an element of precarity that the studio is trying to solve after that. How do you make it so that you can be sure what you're doing next year if you're living in a film by film basis? The answer is you rely more on sequels. You rely more on this kind of system of production. You make Indiana Jones movies, you make Star Wars movies, and slowly that evolves into the franchise system, which is, okay, we aren't making a film here. We're not making a singular film or even a couple of films. We are making a franchise. We are making a thing that's going to keep us all in jobs for a decade or more, and it's going to make money out of a variety of different media outputs. And I think that's the kind of way of clarifying the difference.
Yeah, it feels very, the way you've described it, it feels very sort of top down, I guess, in the way that franchises are organized. Perhaps doesn't have the same implications as transmedia. When we talked about fandom, it feels very sort of industrial. I suppose one of the things there are people writing on the franchise era, and there's an introduction to a book called The Franchise Era, Managing Media in the Digital Economy, that talks about I guess the blockbuster and how one would define the blockbuster, and talks about the Tim Burton 1989 Batman, exemplifying a kind of model of synergy, which is obviously something we talked about when we talked about transmedia. So synergy begins to spread in this period, with a comic book character birthing a media franchise whose sequels, animated spin-offs, and ancillary merchandise arrived through the various sectors of the Warner's conglomerate. So in terms of blockbusters then, so franchises are rooted in let's say, how Jeff King would talk about blockbusters as sort of based on pre-sold pleasures. So there's already an existing audience for franchises work on the basis of an existing audience. So you have the Mission Impossible films the Mission Impossible television programs that people like, who also like other Tom Cruise movies, and of course these two things come together. So it's tied quite closely with this post 1970s blockbuster shift within Hollywood.
But the examples you just used there articulate very nicely the difference that happens in the noughties, which is that Mission Impossible was never intended to be an 8, 9, whatever it is, film franchise. Batman, I think they hoped to make some sequels, but they never. They didn't sign up. They didn't build the infrastructure for a Batman franchise until after Batman was a hit. So if the 80s and 90s are a system of proving that you can create franchises out of movies, when the noughties happen, studios go, okay, well, why don't we just create movies out of franchises? Why don't we make Lord of the Rings in 3 films in one go? And we have an entire film industry in New Zealand ready to do this. And then once we finish Lord of the Rings, we need another franchise, so we'll do The Hobbit. Okay, that worked. Why don't we do the same with the Chronicles of Narnia? That's 10 movies. Harry Potter. And then slowly we get to a system where we've got Marvel Studios, which is called Marvel Studios, but it's not a film studio in the kind of old sense of the world. It's a studio that makes a franchise. James Gunn is now the head of DC's franchise. This is the change in the system, is that we go from if the 80s and 90s are about proving franchises can exist, the noughties are about proactively trying to create them.
Yeah, no, and I think that sort of speaks to a chronological or a kind of retrospection that can happen when a film is a surprising, you have that kind of films are surprising successes, and studios go, brilliant, well, what we'll do is we'll make franchises out of them. But what we're saying here is that and in the case of something like Lord of the Rings and fantasy franchises, in the way that you've described it, that the franchise existed before the films.
Well, the structure of the franchise was built to make They didn't make the Fellowship of the Ring as a film and then tried to create a franchise out of it. They made the Fellowship of the Ring as a calculated effort to create a 3-part trilogy, all in one go. I mean, that's a kind of liminal example in that it's sort of a franchise, but it's only 3 movies, so there's parallels with things like Star Wars and things like that prior to it, or the prequels trilogy or something like that. But Harry Potter certainly, they from day one they knew they were making 10 movies or whatever. Well, what was it? 7 movies, which became 8 movies or whatever the precise numbers are. And then we get to a state where why does there have to be a cap on this? Why can't we have a franchise based on Marvel, the whole universe of Marvel? Why can't we have a franchise based on the monsters from Universal? And remember that catastrophic attempt to build a franchise out of the Mummy and the Wolfman, all this kind of stuff with Tom Cruise and wasn't Johnny Depp in it as the Invisible Man or some sort of nonsense like that? Anyway, so there are clear attempts to build franchises. They don't all work, but they are not films that become franchises. They are franchises in which films are created to build them.
Well, there we go. We've hit time, but we have mentioned a couple of books along the way and stuff on New Hollywood by Jeff King and this, and I'll put the link to the franchise era. Anything else?
Yeah, just 2 quick books. One, J.D. Connor's The Studio After the Studios, Neoclassical Hollywood, 1970 to 2010. That's a really good book that kind of charts this historical trajectory that we just explored. And another good one, The Frodo Franchise by Kristen Thompson, which kind of explains the kind of what Lord of the Rings does to the film industry really, really well.
Great. Well, there we go then. That is franchises done and dusted, as it were.
Well, they're never done and dusted, but but hopefully explained a little bit better. As always, if you have a suggestion for a future Footnote episode, you can email us at fananimresearch, FANANIM research @gmail.com or at us at Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram using the same handle. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Bye.